pulls you to the ground. It's something that pushes you to the ground, which is interesting, because I always thought, you think of magnetism, you think you're kind of like magnetically stuck to the planet. It's kind of how I always perceived it. But they said, no, there's a relationship to that, but actually gravity is a force of push, not pull. So we're still, I still have a billion questions on that one, and I'm sure there's lots of charts eventually that will answer it. But this is what refers to the G-force. So it's there's a G-force of push, going out into the manifest side that would be pushing on matter, all right, or pushing matter into solidification. You could look at it that way too. There's another part that I don't fully understand yet either that has to do with the opposite of the G-force, which is called the J-force, or the joule force, that has to do with when you end up with a higher number on this side. There is a joule force, and that's a force of actually stored electrical potential, and it's a lot more than that, and we're just starting to understand those things too. So this is, I'm telling you some of where this is going as well as where it is, because there's a lot more to this than just seeing little balls and how they evolve together. It's literally going into the core forces of nature. So this one's the times 4 rep. Just went through that one. That one ends up with a positive 4 G-force. Next one is, thank you, Annie, just up a little bit. This one, Kusha rep 5, is a times 5 rep. 3 times 5 is a quantum of 15, half in manifest and half out in spirit. However, this is a quantum 15. It's not catheric, because catheric was a quantum of 3, half in, half out. So when the quantum differs, the name of the type of energy will differ. All right, it will be related to catheric energy because it's half in and half out, but it will have another type of name, and we just haven't had time to go through all the different names of the energies. But this particular energy is half in, half out of manifestation with a quantum of 15, which means you have 7.5 Partakai power pushing outward, or outward thrust, and you have 7.5 pulling backward. This gives you, actually, when you subtract that one from this one, a 0 G-force. A 0 G-force state, that state of equilibrium, is a still point state, but it is the state where you can turn to light, disappear, and go fully into spirit and pop back out elsewhere. So it is a state of matter that is associated with levitation, real levitation, not bouncing on your knees to try to make your body bounce up off the ground like some people call levitation. Whatever. Must have sore knees. But there is a state that atoms can go into that has to do with entering states of matter that have a 0 G. All right? They have no push and no pull. They float. And they actually can go into creation point and expand into what would be spirit light. There's a lot more to the 0 G-force thing, but achieving what was called the Christ star state that allows you to, let's say, fire your joules, all right, which are the stored energy quantum in your body and in your spirit body, allow you to wake those up in order to de-densify the atomic matter sufficiently to go into the Adashi turnaround, so you can literally pop out of here and pop up in the Adashi cycles, going back to source in places that aren't harnessed in messes like this one is. So you would hit that 0 G-force. You would need to, you're at that point where you disappeared and where you had what's called a Celestalline wave, which is a spirit wave that comes in and creates a chemical counterpart in the body that gives the whole body systems, and I believe the endocrine glands are supposed to respond to it, and it creates something. They used to in the old days call it both white powder gold and blue powder gold, but it's a natural form of it, not the body creates itself, not a form that's manufactured, because there are certain people who are trying to make that recipe from ancient Egypt, that you can find them on the net and stuff, and that stuff will kill you eventually. So they're trying to mimic what the body, when it's not mutated, can naturally do and does naturally do. They used to call it that, not because it's powder, well, not when it's active it isn't, but if someone has just gone through a stargate, through a natural process, they will produce a Celestalline wave in their body, and it will create a residue very briefly on the skin. and that residue is it's actually a liquid, and then it will dry and make a powder. And in ancient Egypt, they used to collect it because you could, well, the ones who didn't have the DNA that could do that could ingest bits of it and get through at least minor gates using it. So all of that is connected to reaching the zero G-force state, because that allows you to literally go into a transfiguration point and fully transfigure the atomic structure. It's not just with this type of energy. There's various other ones that come out with a zero G state. And the zero G state simply means that the thrust going outward into manifestation on its vector compared to the pull going in the opposite direction on its vector line are equal, and it is still. There's no tension. It's just still. So anyway, we'll go back up to the next one. We have Kusha Rep 6. It gets really complicated very soon. And this is the part I hate. Oh no, what did it do on 7? Right? But on 6 wasn't too bad. 6 was particle power 3 times 6 gives you a quantum of 18, 1/3 of it in manifest, and 2/3 of it in spirit. Right? So we have 1/3 of 18 in manifest, which would be 3, and 2/3, which would be 15, in spirit. All right. So note, negative G-force, when spirit pull is greater than thrust quantum, it is the Elan Prana Joule force stored behind the creation point door. So this gets into the J-force. All right. They didn't get, they still called this G, they called it negative G-force. A negative G-force is a J-force, or a Joule force, the stored electrical potential that is stored behind the creation point door in the spirit side, depending on your vector, right? If you're the manifest side out here, it is the Joule force that's actually stored behind in the Iridanis body, interestingly. Where are your Joules? They're in your Iridanis body, and that has to do with a very complicated process of prana exchange and prana breaking down into two things, where it's simple enough that if you have mana going out, and at a certain point the mana that's coming out forward on the vector line coming out to manifestation, part of it turns around, or actually the spirit pole on the other side pulls a portion of the mana away and turns it into prana. It turns it back around and pulls it toward the spirit side. So that's where mana and where mana breaks down into mana, still going outward with a positive charge, and prana that still has a positive charge, but it starts to go back towards spirit point door. There's another point where that breaks down, that backflow that's going back to spirit breaks down into what is called prana ki and prana chi. The prana ki part turns back around and comes back out and forms the Iridanis body, and the prana ki is the part that keeps going and goes into the full Ire field and stays in the spirit body. And this has to do with conception and things when we get into the part where we see what this has to do about how bodies are made here, where there's supposed to be a natural relationship between prana ki and prana chi. I believe, well, the chi, the negative charge one that's still going back to a creation point door, is the smaller one. It has 1/3 of the entire quantum of a prana. Now a prana has, a unit of prana would have a positive 11 and 2/3 particle power. When that splits, it splits into 2/3 and 1/3, and 2/3 of it turns back around to form the Iridanis body. Okay, it splits going out, turns back around, part of it. All right, it turns back around, it's on its way back here, then another part of it splits and goes back this way. Whoops. That part would be the prana chi, because it goes back into positive spin. And that one is 2/3, and it would have, I believe it's 7.7778 or something like that. If you take 11 and 2/3, divide it by 3, and times it by 2, you will get the prana chi number. And if you just take the divided by 3 number, you'll get the smaller number, the 1/3, that is the prana ki. And I believe that's 3 point something something something. I don't have those written down anywhere, I don't think. But anyway, it is the prana chi that is the spirit, the primary energy of the spirit body that is in the Ire field of the Adore side, and it is the prana ki that is the part that ends up standing at the creation point door, where you have the mana going outward, and you have the prana chi here, and the prana ki, prana ki here, ki positive, and the chi here. And there's a whole process of bringing the prana, chi, and ki together so they reform an entire prana quantum that allows for progressive embodiment of the spirit body into the manifest body through the iridanis body. And that would involve firing the jewels. And the jewels, or the ja'arels, are actually stored in the prana ki of the iridanis body. So there's a whole intricate set of interactions that have to do with these little structures that start with the kusha. Now, we're back here. I've got to keep going because there's a lot of graphs there. If there's anybody left awake, including me, I'll be amazed by the time we get through these. I'm sorry to put you through this, but it's fascinating stuff, and you do need to understand it to understand some of the things we're going to be doing. So anyway, we get to the times 7 rep. By the way, that one had a negative 12 g-force because you had 15 pulling back this way, quantum, and only 3 pulling out. And so you subtract the smaller from the larger, and it gives you that, but it's on this side, so it's negative g-force, which means it's joule force. So that would be a 12 joule force. All right. Now, joules are kind of like your savings account, right, when it comes to quantum. The money you're saving behind there, in case you need that power someday. We're going to need it, that power, when it comes to slide zones and getting there and getting the atomic mutation out of our bodies. Anyway, but it's nice to know it's still there. It's like a savings account you forgot your hat, or somebody stole the book, and it's still in the bank. You know it's there, but you can't get it out, and nobody will believe that it's yours. Right? Never have that, but really, that's mine. I don't have the checkbook anymore. Right? Yeah, I lost my pass card. Anyway, here you go. Kusha rep 7. It's a times 7 rep, get this, of Kusha 6 quanta. It would have been, I mean, just times 7 rep of 3 would have been fine, but no. It's a 7 times rep of the Kusha 6, which was here, quantum. And the Kusha 6 quantum, not even just straight, okay, the quantum was 18. It's complicated. It starts to form what's called the heart of God. These parts, when they're put together, form a structure called the eye of God. When they get into the 7th rep, it starts going into the formation of the heart of God. And this is where we get into phase sets that eventually become vector domain phase sets that we live in, that literally are the massive ones that are the cosmic spheres within spheres that form the different domains from the core to the inner to the middle to the outer and all of the manifest structures within them. And it starts with the heart of God structure. It is what's called the first polarity equilibrium unit in the 7 suns of the 7 suns. And let's see if I can speak this. We have 126 per. I have to remember how this works, because when my brain is not exhausted, I remember how this works. So, because you're timesing this by 6, but not, I think you do the 3 times, yeah, let me see what they did here. Each half manifest. Okay, quantum of 21 manifest. Okay, so on the manifest side you had 3. You times that by 7, it gives you 21. Right, particle power going into the manifest. If you times the 15 going to spirit by 7, you get the 105 particle power going into spirit. Each of these is half manifest and half spirit. Okay, it's getting more complicated as we go. So we have a quantum of 10.5 particle power and quantum of 52.5 particle power going into manifest, because those two were broken down. Then on the other side of the 10.5, you'd have 10.5 going that way, and you'd have 52.5 going this way, because at least they're half and half. So it was only dividing them in half. And it ends up with a 63 particle power going into manifestation, balanced with a 63 particle power going into spirit, which gives it a 0 G force and a 0 J force. It's equilibrium. But what it does do is, because it's connected to, and the others are at its center, it begins to phase. These little structures, these little cells, start to expand and contract together and spark. So it begins to pump. It begins to thump like a heart. It is the heart of God. And there's actually a sphere here, and a sphere here, and a sphere here, and it has quite a few cells at this point, this begins the formation of even larger structures, and you will see this structure replicated in even more replications than this as the structure of the spirit body grows. So we have one, let's count the balls, one at the center, then we have one, I get blind here, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7, I have to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there we go, 7 sets. I get cross-eyed looking at those sometimes, because there's other sets that have 4, or actually 3 going out this way, and then it actually counts as 4 because there's 2 at the center, so it gets more complex, and I've been looking at those for a while. But these will eventually give you the structures of the yugas, of the expansion spheres, yugas going out, 4 yugas going out, and 3 yetas coming back, the Adashi cycles, and it's coming back and forth to the center point, the natural cycles of expansion and contraction from creation point back to creation point, that literally we're all living in the middle of, but on a very large level as far as, well, actually a universal level is small compared to the size of the cosmos. But this works too on the tiniest level of little things that are so tiny you can't even see. They're born through this structure of the kusha going into the formation of the what becomes the eye of God and the heart of God and the larger structures that builds. And if you put all these diagrams in reverse and stick them all together and see what it actually looks like when you've got them going in both directions, that ought to be really interesting. But one side at a time will at least give us some clarity on the structure. The next one, please. At least my ankle stopped hurting. Now, it's called the eye of God because the structure that it forms, when you put those all that we looked at separately, when you put all those cell structures together on this same creation point that they are, it indeed does form a structure very similar to the eyeball structure. And it works in a very similar way as far as the lenses and what they do with light. This here, that you see here, that would be the optic nerve in a physical eyeball, actually is something that happens here. Because at a certain point you have this larger cell around this cluster. Alright, this larger cell is called the allure, the eye of allure, or the first eye of God. It forms, I believe, I think that one forms on the 8th rep. And inside of it you have each of the kusha rep cells that formed from the kusha rep that we just saw individually. They're all actually on center, but each on that same creation point line, either before or in front of or behind the creation point door. And that's where you get what energy spheres are pushing out more, which are coming back here more. And there's a whole interaction between them, a continual action that creates the natural forces of push, pull, and thrust, and all the things that forces like gravity are actually formed from. And it also creates the beginning of refraction currents that I don't know a lot at the moment. I'm going to have to research it, obviously, about how eyeballs work. And what they do, as far as I know, you see something, is when we see stuff, it's really not there in the form that we see it at. And science already knows that. We get this chemical thing that happens with the interaction of electromagnetic frequencies when we look at something and light bounces back in and our retina does something, and I don't know what the whole chemical process is, but we get chemical signals that get processed as visual information, and that's how we see, right? And I think that's fascinating that science already knows all of that. So it is a similar type of thing. Actually everything is energy. It's electromagnetic frequency, and this is the eye that sees electromagnetic frequency, but not just sees it. Our eyes do this too. They've been shut off pretty much because of the mutation, but we're turning them back on, where just like eyeballs have optical currents, there is a set of currents that run here. This later becomes the center current in what's called the Kalihara chamber. That is the big chamber that runs front to back through our large spherical bodies. And this chamber would act like the optic nerve. And actually, if this is the source field, like the undifferentiated consciousness field of God's source, and this all started from God's source focusing its attention on one point in its own consciousness field. And that created a warming of the consciousness substance that the consciousness field of source is made out of. And then source withdrew its attention And that what started to warm and started to, like it, let's say it was ethers, and they started to unfreeze, it started and go into a liquid or a gel state. Then when the look away, the warmth was removed from it temporarily, and it started to solidify again. This is a process by which the first particle is actually born. It's more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, it's kind of like how thought gels, or how focus of attention gels and then solidifies and literally becomes the first particle. All of that for that one little point of focus in Source's consciousness field, like thinking in your own mind, right? Was first particle born, and from all of that, all of this has already emerged. Now this is emerging literally from when all we had before was the triad, and the triad formed the kusha, and then on the other side the kasha. So the eye of God structures formed from the kusha that formed from the particle, or the triad that formed from two particle, and that's how it started. And it all started as a singularity, the eternal singularity within the consciousness field of Source, and the focus of attention that became the first particle can be looked at as the first differentiation or the first distinction within the eternal singularity. So when science says that they feel creation and Big Bang and all that emerged from a singularity, yes, it did. But it's an eternal singularity that is always there, and it is everywhere and imbued within the entire scalar matrix that is the consciousness field of Source. We all exist within that field. So back to the eyeball. Our eyes actually transmit currents, just like this transmits currents. And in a minute you'll see that what are called the tunnel of love, which is the core current that runs right through into the eye of God, that runs right into the central creation point. Each one of these creates a tunnel. If that's a sphere, right, let's say it has it's generating currents, because let's say it's where it is, it's spinning. And as it's spinning, it's making currents around it, and it's making sparks. And it's sending out tunnels of sparks from itself in tubular currents that are moving both forward and backward from it. These become the core flows, or what are called the lavas, or the love. Where is the love? The love is started here in the eye of God, and then eventually, well, also remember the heart of God is here too. We're not showing the little phase balls in there because it would be too complex. Where you could see it, but it would distort being able to see clearly what this is. And at some point, they're going to teach us about lensing and how, when the currents come out, how they bend, where they bend, what part of it you see as a hologram, what part goes on beyond you, what part's behind you. So these will be eventually, imagine you're in like a spherical movie screen, but several of the screens are bending light and sending energy back as visual stimuli, because these are literally the creation nodes, if you want to call it, from first particle to what later becomes the light body. These are all part of the spirit body anatomy, and it starts with one eye of God and has a similar effect. Now what we will learn as we are progressing with the activations, you may start getting burning of eyes sometimes, or like where your eyes are itchy, like you feel like you have little crystals of invisible sand in them on occasion. The eyes will be activating with this. Our pupils were meant to transmit the natural currents. When I speak to you and I'm up here, I can hardly see faces, especially since my vision is getting pretty bad because I'm doing way too many close-up drawings and my distance vision is pretty shot. But there are times when, even when my vision used to be good, I still couldn't see. I could see a bit where I could see shapes, not any detail or anything like that. Because the eyes, it's almost as if like there's an aperture that opens up, and I sometimes would feel like my eyes were this big, and I was seeing this way, and I could see all sorts of things. I could see like down the block, I could see what's happening over there in a boat that's about 2 miles offshore. I could do a couple of things like that, right, and be aware of them and see them with these eyes. But I'd have to bring them back in to see what's here. So there are things that are happening with our eyes. When we start to go into DNA activations that are bringing the spirit body back in, we'll naturally open up eye currents that exist in the eyes. We've begun to look into that in the tribes classes, where they showed very specifically there are certain things that will happen when you hit certain levels of activation. We're not going to cover that bit tonight, or we'll never, ever, ever get to sleep. But it has to do with, there will be like a bluish ring, like an indigo ring that will form naturally around the pupil, between the pupil and the iris, and then there will be a pale, like a pale aqua colored ring between the iris and the whites of the eyes. And they will indicate certain levels of what are called Kusha crystal activations in your entire body structure. And each Kusha crystal level that activates, because there are one for each of the density domains, each one that activates brings in the next set of core flows from that domain and gets you to the next level. That would be the next ascension level. And it does show in the eyes, so the currents open in the eyes. Right now our eyes have been mutated just like the rest of us, where there's very limited currents coming through, because our natural currents that connect us to our edons and to our adons and to the core behind us that we came out of into the outer domains are literally being shut off. And as we heal this mutation, they start to turn back on. So that's one of the things, if you have, and it's more so, I've not noticed a lot of blurred vision other than my usual, but that is seriously just because I need glasses, because I've done way too much close work and I'm still doing it. But if you notice periods where all of a sudden the eyes are just like hot or burning, or just like, ow, what is wrong with me? Or if you feel like you have a hangover and you didn't drink anything or do anything to cause that, right? Where it's as if the backs of your eyeballs feel like they swelled too big for your head. And there's just like this pressure feeling, and you go around, oh, yuck. You know, it's like those days when it's like so humid, you feel like your whole brain swelled and your head's not big enough to hold it and everything's pressing on itself. You might get bits of those, and you might even get little bits of headaches here and there. I tend to not get headaches, but some people do get them. But they're short-lived symptoms. It's just when it's just activating in the DNA and coming into the body template that you would notice things like that. And then once the body says, okay, all right, I handled the frequency, right? It'll calm down, and they only come in little pulses anyway, and gently build the atomic structure's ability up to hold that kind of frequency. It doesn't come in and like blast you. So the eyes are one of the ways. And another thing about that is, though, even though there's very specific things you can look for in your eyes to tell what level you're at, there is a natural glaze effect that will happen, and you'll actually get a misread if you try to read anyone else's, even if you stood next to them in a mirror and tried to see what was in their eyes. There's a natural protocol of that is personal, and you don't actually have the right to read what's in anyone's eyes but your own, but you do have a right to read your own, because you can get an idea of what level of activation you're at, and eventually you could actually read each of those little, what do they call them, ciliary bodies or whatever, that form the little starburst, and they would tell you very specific things about what frequencies in your fire lines were turned on, what ones were blocked, what ones you needed help with. So you could literally read somebody's entire spiritual body as well as their physical body through the eyes, but there are certain glaze things. It's literally like a shield that'll come up if someone tries to read the spirit body. So, yeah, like when there's certain things that you once in a while will see, like certain ones that went fully Metatronic would actually get this really intense orange ring around the pupils, and that was scary, because once in a while you might find an avatar from the other side and kind of go, oh my God, did I see what I think